Welcome back to another episode of Health Animated. On this podcast, we strive to make health information accessible to everyone. My name is Alex.
And I'm Danielle. If you're returning to our podcast, thanks for your ongoing support. And if you're listening for the first time, welcome. We hope you stick around. So today in this episode, we wanted to talk to you about the sunny days ahead and about sunscreen. So I will say in advance that this topic is surprisingly a crowd pleaser. And how I know this is because it was a really nice sunny weekend and it gave me the opportunity to throw out some sunscreen facts while I was with a friend. And, they were pretty interested. So I would say that they were soaking up what I was putting down.
I feel like you planned for that pun. I'll give it to you. We'll keep it in the podcast. Yeah, no. We've been having such fantastic weather here in Vancouver, and it really just makes me want to talk about this topic even more. And I will also say that this topic is very timely and topical. So that's my
topical.
That's my lame pun.
That was good. That was not planned.
That was unscripted, as with most of our conversations. Okay, well, aside from our very organic introduction, this episode, we do want to walk you through things such as how to be sun safe and also how to apply various sunscreens and everything else in between. So hopefully this topic will be very timely for everyone here, and both Danielle and I are excited to kind of get started.
So, Alex, do you want to walk us through our first question, which is, what are UVA and UVB rays, and why should I care?
That's a very good question. Well, let's go back to sort of the science days. So, first of all, we have the sun, and the sun produces sunlight. And as part of the sunlight, there are different types of rays that are presented. And the ones that we're most concerned with are those that are called ultraviolet rays, also known as UV rays, because they tend to be the most damaging to our skin. So out of the ultraviolet or UV rays, there's really two basic types of rays that we're most concerned with respect to our skin. So they are called UVB and UVA. So I'll start by talking about UVB. So UVB rays, they're basically the main culprit for producing sunburn. And one way I like to remember that is by associating the letter B with sunburn. And so that's a little trick for everyone out there. And so with the UVB rays, a lot of it does actually get absorbed through the Earth's ozone layer, which becomes a really important point when we later talk about which parts of the planet is more prone to receiving UVB rays, because part of that would have to do with ozone layer. So as I mentioned, UVB rays play a great role in sunburn, and it also plays a huge role in causing skin cancers. So you may have heard of such skin cancers called basal cell carcinoma or even melanomas. And overall, compared to UVA rays, UVB rays are about 1,000 times more powerful. So now that I've talked about UVB rays, Danielle, do you want to walk us through UVA rays?
Yeah, so UVA rays can also play a role in skin cancer formation. And in addition to this, they also penetrate more deeply into the skin and can actually play a greater role in the premature aging of our skin and can include things like fine lines and wrinkles. So in this case, A is for aging. So it's the UV that we do not want. So another thing that's associated with UV rays in general is a reaction that you can get with some medications called photosensitizing reactions. So what happens in these reactions is that a drug that you're taking orally or that you're applying onto your skin, like a topical cream or lotion that has medication in it, they can actually absorb the UV light from the sun and they can actually release it into the skin, which can then have a toxic effect on our skin cells. So that's why it's important to talk to your pharmacist if you start a new medication and you're about to have a big day at the beach or a sunny day, because you don't want to have, a photosensitizing reaction.
Yeah, that sounds scary. Photosensitizing reaction. So can you maybe I don't know if I'm putting you on the spot, but are you able to provide some examples of like maybe common medications that people might be on and they don't realize that it can lead to photosensitizing reactions?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great question, Alex. I was going to say to talk to their pharmacist, but we can answer a few of those here. So this is not by any means an inclusive list, but some medications that you can look out for are certain antibiotics, such as a class called tetracyclines. So tetracycline, doxycycline. Another class are known as fluoroquinolones, so something like Cipro. Also are sulfa antibiotics. Other things can actually include over-the-counter pain medications. So things like ibuprofen or naproxen. So other things can actually be just like topical acne medications like isotretinoin, or even taking retinoids orally. So it's always a good idea to just, check in with your pharmacist and ask them. And Alex is shaking his head because I've said it again, but it is important. Nobody wants a photosensitivity reaction.
I remember, when you were giving that list, I remember back in the day I used to take doxycycline for my acne, and that was one thing I remember being counseled on, just to make sure I'm careful when I'm outside in the sun for too long. And then the other thing that I think is quite relevant in today's sort of beauty, I'll say like beauty trends, and it's the use of retinoids as part of someone's skin routine, because I think retinoids are really popular right now in helping with skin turnover and in improving like skin complexion. So you'll notice that with many of those products, it comes with a warning, which is sun sensitivity. So make sure you do use sunscreen when you are using retinoid-based products.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Alex. And that's another reason why, probably putting them on at bedtime is better as well, because then you're not hopefully getting exposed to UV rays at nighttime.
So that was a quick little spiel on UVA and UVB rays. So now we want to take some time just sort of honing in on answering the question of why you should be wearing sunscreen. I know a lot of us already have a good idea of why we should be wearing sunscreen, but we're going to provide you with more in-depth information and throw in some stats to really help drive that point about using sunscreen. So, shall we go for it?
Yeah, let's do it. So I know that for me as a kid, and some other people may have had the same experiences, but my mom was always very protective about sun exposure with my siblings and I when we were young. And I remember when we went to the lake, she would always make sure we wore like a big hat, and like not only like one of those like hats that like have a brim, but these hats, they would almost be like a mullet hat. Like it would have like
like the back,
like a neck protector.
Oh my god.
Yeah, on the back. I definitely remember those. I don't know, but so there was those hats, and then she would always get us to wear like a big like white long sleeve t-shirt, like even when we were like in the water, and we would just be like, oh. And like when you get to a certain age, like when you're like, I don't know, I was probably like grade 2, grade 3,
you're like, this isn't
you just
cool.
want to like look cool. Yeah, totally. And like even as a kid, you want to look cool. So just remember that very nerdy image of myself as a child, and we're going to go back to that. And just another fun fact about the shirts I used to wear, they used to be white colored or light. So keep that anecdote in mind as we go through, and we can kind of unpack if that is a good thing to do.
Your mom sounds like so smart. Like she's on it. She knows exactly what to do for you guys. So even though it's not cool, now you can thank her because you have beautiful skin now. Very like ageless skin.
That's true. I feel like I get my ageless skin from my mom, but maybe it's not genetics. Maybe it's nurture, not nature.
Or it could be both.
Or a bit of both. Yeah, it probably is both. She's got amazing skin, and so does her mom.
So jealous.
It's like just great. Okay, so I digress. Let's talk about the most important thing, which is protecting our skin from skin cancer. So UV rays can actually damage the DNA that's in our skin cells. So over time, as the DNA damage increases, it increases the risk of mutations in our skin that can give rise to cancerous cells. So burning can also increase the damage that's done to our skin and then also increase our risk of skin cancer further. So it's also good to know, though, that you don't have to have a sunburn in order for UV light to actually damage your skin. Just by virtue of being in the sun alone, it's a risk factor. So something that I thought was pretty surprising was just the rates of skin cancer. So in 2019 in Canada, it was estimated that about 7,800 Canadians would have been diagnosed with melanoma that year. And melanoma accounts for about 4% of new cancer cases in Canada and almost 2% of cancer deaths.
And we couldn't forget about our neighbors down south. So in the USA, it's been estimated that in 2021, so this current year, there will be just over 200,000 cases of melanoma. And unfortunately, about 7,200 people will die from melanoma this year alone. So I would guess probably a lot of it could be preventable. So definitely very interesting statistics.
Yeah, that is very interesting. So if we kind of take a step back and, think over time, we've evolved as humans. So do we have any natural methods of protecting our skin from sun exposure? Well, yes. So there is melanin, which is our skin pigment, and it's known as our body's first line of defense because it blocks UV radiation and it actually dissipates it off our skin as just heat. So melanin, it protects against damage, and in response to UV light exposure, the amount of melanin made by our skin actually starts to increase. And that actually causes our skin to darken, and it kind of increases further that sun protection. So you can kind of think of it as like a little umbrella, sun umbrella that's protecting your cell's DNA. So how does skin color fit into that? So by virtue of having melanin in our skin, we have a level of protection. So the literature states that the SPF for black skin is about 13.4, and for white skin, it's about 3.4. So I wasn't able to find any literature on skin like mine, which is like Indian skin, which is I would have been curious to be able to report. But, I hypothesize it's probably somewhere in that range. So this is something that's very interesting. But I also think this is probably something that's been misconstrued and have left some people thinking that darker skin tones do not need to worry as much about the sun. But I'm going to say this very clearly. I'm going to say this a couple times. All skin tones need sunscreen. Everyone needs sunscreen. Alex, do you want to say it one more time?
Yeah, this is my time to shine. Yes, I agree. All skin tones require sunscreen. It doesn't matter if you're white or black or in between. Everyone needs sunscreen and can benefit from the use of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for emphasizing that. So, okay, we're going to tell you why everyone needs sunscreen. Skin cancer. So skin cancer accounts for about 20 to 30% of the cancers in white people, only 2 to 4% of the cancers in Asian Americans, and 1 to 2% of the cancers in African Americans. But Alex, who do you think has higher morbidity and mortality associated with skin cancer?
Well, I feel like the way you're phrasing this question sounds like a trick question, so I'm going to say African Americans.
So you would be correct. So it's what the literature has found is that individuals of color actually have their diagnosis and treatments delayed, which can actually result in higher morbidity and mortality associated with skin cancer. So that really, really sucks. And that's just kind of goes to show it's an important reason to make sure that all of us are wearing sunscreen. So it's interesting because there was a study that was done out of America that was surveying 55 African-American patients that were in a clinic. And about 74% of them had never used sunscreen. 15% did use sunscreen. And 11% of them were never counseled to even wear sunscreen. And the majority of the respondents were not actually aware that African Americans could get skin cancer. So what this tells us is that as a society, we have not been good at relaying this very, very important information. So some of the things that are thought to account for the differences in morbidity and mortality with individuals of color can include lack of public education campaigns. So we really need more education campaigns to educate people of all skin types. And the differences in survival rates could also be attributed to the fact that skin cancer is actually diagnosed at a more advanced stage in people of color. Other things could be related to like socioeconomic factors like lack of insurance coverage, as this was a US study. And also, in addition to the advanced stage presentation, malignancies in people of color can usually present like atypically. So, and because historically skin cancer prevention and screening practices have been like lower among Hispanics, Blacks, and Asians, and historically our prevention and screening practices have really just missed a big group, which is our people of color. And we just really need to look at trying to tailor our interventions as well to these groups. So to switch gears a little bit, the other thing that we wanted to talk to you guys about are the effects of photoaging on our skin. So as Alex said, UVA, A is for aging. What is it doing to our skin? So you can probably guess based on the name alone that the sun makes our skin age more prematurely. So these changes happen in the top layers of the skin, which is the stratum corneum and the epidermal layers. The sun can actually make them more rough and coarse and dull, and it can actually contribute to fine lines and wrinkles. And advanced photoaging can actually affect the elasticity of our skin, and it can decrease collagen, and it can actually change our top layer of the skin. And it can also affect our skin's ability to retain water, and it can result in our skin looking kind of dry and leathery. So you can notice some of these changes if you look at the areas of the skin that are typically exposed to the sunlight, like the back of our hands or our forearms. And, you know, over time, even our faces can get these.
I'm like looking at those parts of my body right now. I'm like, oh my gosh, I should use more sunscreen.
I know. I just started looking at my hands too. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I probably should use sunscreen. Yeah, you don't really think, because you put the sunscreen on with your hands, but you don't really, I never actually get my hands afterwards.
That's true.
That's probably a gap.
Or some people might end up just washing their hands afterwards because it's just second nature. They just wash their hands after using something.
Yeah, I totally do that.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, my poor hands.
And I guess also, you know, I have no evidence to back this up, but I'll just say it anyways. But I'm pretty sure like the fact that we're all washing hands way more frequently due to this pandemic, it's probably like in some, you know, indirect way, like washing off some of the sunscreen on our hands.
Okay, so now we need to carry our hand sanitizer and our sunscreen. Mm-hmm. And we need to do both in, you know, somewhat rapid succession. Okay, Alex. So now that we know that sun exposure can increase the risk of skin cancer and also sun damage to our skin, can you walk us through how to prevent this and like what we can do to help our skin?
This is a big question. There's so many different ways where you can kind of prevent sun exposure or limit your sun exposure. So I think the first thing I want to start talking about is, you know, we'll get to sunscreen in a moment, but the first thing I want to talk about is understanding the UV index and just gaining awareness of what that even means, and also this idea of the time to burn.
Yeah, so I didn't actually know about the UV index until we learned about it in pharmacy school.
So when you look at like the weather reports, you'll often see something called the UV index, and it is a scale from 0 to 11 that grades how strong the sun is and provides recommendation for sun safety, as well as how long it will take to be outside before you burn. So if you're like one of us and, you know, constantly use your phone, it's just simply opening up your weather app, your favorite weather app, to kind of check your UV index. You know, like we've said, this past week where we live here, the sun has been amazing. So I wouldn't be surprised if the UV index was in the 7+ range. And there's a lot of factors that can actually go into calculating this UV index. And so one question that some people might wonder about is, you know, is the amount of UV radiation that one is exposed to equal everywhere on the earth? Well, the answer is no. There are many factors that determine how much UV you're exposed to. So the first factor is geography. So to no one's surprise, the further you are away from the equator, the more sort of protection you get from the sun. So that's because the sun rays have to travel a longer distance, and the ozone layer is thicker further away from the equator. So people who are in, say, Hawaii, might get more sun exposure compared to someone like us who's more north and from Canada. Other factors include altitude. So if you are an avid skier, then you're in the mountains and slopes, you might want to be more thoughtful about putting on sunscreen versus someone who's closer to the water. Which also brings me to another point, which is reflection. So if you are in the mountains and there's a lot of snow there, the snow offers the medium to reflect the light, so that can also increase your exposure to the sun and may perhaps lead to sunburn. So be mindful of your surroundings as well. And then one that's really important is time of day and the weather conditions. So the sun is most intense at noon because that's where the sun is at its highest point. So that's why anywhere between 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. is the worst for UV exposure. So if you're someone like me and you like to kind of hang on the sun and enjoy that feeling of the warmth, you might want to think about, hanging out outside of those peak hours. It might be better for your skin in the long run. And of course, weather conditions, to no one's surprise, plays a big role. So on a cloudy day, the UV index will tend to be a bit lower, but bear in mind, even if it's cloudy, even if it's rainy, you should still be wearing sunscreen because the UV rays can still penetrate through the clouds, and it's really important to put on sunscreen for that reason. Now that we talked about being more thoughtful about checking the weather and looking at the UV index, what if you do need to go outside in the sun? Are there any particular clothing items or things you could do to kind of protect yourself? So do you want to walk us through that?
Yeah, definitely. So you can protect your skin by obviously wearing clothing. I didn't actually know this, but clothing can have a UV protection factor rating as well, also known as a UPF. So a UPF of 25 to 30 is considered very good protection, and a UPF of over 50 is considered excellent. So this is typically found in the jerseys of professional sports athletes and whatnot, people that are outside lots and have lots of sun exposure. You can check the tags on your clothing if it has a UPF, but chances are, if you're like me, none of my clothing have this rating. But what you can look for are clothing with long sleeves and materials that are made from things like lycra or tightly woven fabrics. And actually, you want these fabrics to be dark, lightweight, and breathable. So, my cotton light colored dress shirt probably wouldn't stand this test, but I can totally understand my mom's rationale because honestly, I don't think even knowing this that I would put dark colored clothing on because it just feels so much hotter. So that is an interesting fun fact. Another thing is that wet clothes and white clothes and loosely woven clothes don't actually offer as much protection. So don't be surprised if you actually burn or you tan through those loose white blouses that look really, really nice, but they don't really offer that much protection. So another thing that you can do to help with sun protection is to throw in a hat, because this will help to protect your face, your ears, your neck, and it can also reduce the risk of skin cancer by 40%, which is pretty surprising. Another thing is to slide on some shades. So wearing your sunglasses during the day can actually reduce the risk of cataracts and eye cancers. So do remember to protect your eyes as well. I mean, they're not only cool, they're also protective. Yeah, this can be hard because, I don't know, what do your friends want to do in the summer? They want to go and hang out and tan at the beach. So, if you do socialize with people that like to go tanning and you would like to partake, then as Alex mentioned, do it in a way that's safer. So try to do it outside those peak hours. So say, hey, let's do an early morning tan sesh and then hit the shade after that. So before 10 a.m. You might You might actually get a really good spot at the beach if you go that early. So the last thing I wanted to kind of ingrain into everybody is a really awesome tongue twister that is used across different countries. So to remember how to practice sun-safe behavior, just slip, slop, slap, seek, and slide. So slip on a shirt, slop on some sunscreen, slap on a hat, seek shade, and slide on some shades.
That is a tongue twister.
It's a huge tongue twister. For seek, I just want to say chic, but it's seek. So slip, slop, slap, seek, slide.
Now that we kind of walked you through some general tips that you can take to protect yourself from the sun and from skin cancer, we do want to talk about sunscreen because that's the main portion of our episode. And the way we want to break it down is we want to talk about both the physical blockers, so i.e. the mineral-based sunscreen products, and also the chemical blockers, which are very popular as well. So studies have shown that sunscreen use can reduce the risk of melanoma. And if you go into the Canadian Dermatology Association, they do recommend a few things that you can look for when you are picking out your sunscreen. So number one, you want to be able to look for a product that covers both UVA and UVB. And you want to look for the words broad spectrum. So that's an easy way of identifying something that covers both UVA and UVB. And in Canada, they've even made it mandatory for sunscreen products to kind of have that symbol of UVA, UVB, so that's easily identifiable for consumers. The other factor is, I guess it's more like a plus rather than like a must. But you want to try to choose something that is non-irritating, non-comedogenic. So if you remember from our acne episode, that means it doesn't cause acne. And also something that is hypoallergenic, especially if you're someone that may have sensitive skin. And the last thing you want to look for is you want to choose a product that has a high enough SPF. So this kind of leads to the next appropriate question, which is, how do I know which SPF to choose? Because if you've ever walked into a store or a pharmacy, you'll notice that you have sunscreen products that range from an SPF of 15 all the way through to, I think I've even seen ones are like 100. So it might be tempting to just pick the one that offers you, the highest SPF, right? Which isn't necessarily wrong, but if you want to kind of, understand what the numbers really mean, we're going to talk about that right now. So let's start with defining SPF. So SPF stands for something called sun protection factor. So as you may have already guessed, as the SPF goes up, so does the protection. Going back to the UV index, it's always a good idea to check because that will help determine the amount of time it takes for unprotected skin to burn. So if the UV index is low, for example, you may perhaps be able to stay in the sun for about 30 minutes before you get a sunburn. So what happens when you throw in sunscreen? So if you have an SPF of 30, that means that you could technically sit in the sun for 30 times as long before your skin starts to burn. So that's 30 times the initial amount of unprotected skin. So that was 20 minutes?
You said 30.
So that was 30 minutes. But it is important to take into consideration that there are many other factors that influence the amount of time it takes for our skin to burn. So truly, that equation might not necessarily be applicable for all situations. So it's really important to reapply as appropriate and indicated on the sunscreen product, which is usually advised at every 2 hours. So just to answer the question, what is the best SPF? So according to Health Canada, they recommend using a sunscreen product with an SPF of 30 or higher, because usually anything higher than that doesn't offer you that much more protection. So going back to, again, the scenario of visiting a store or a pharmacy and picking out your sunscreen product, there, if you're looking at bang for your buck, probably SPF 30 is a good place to start. And if you go all the way up to 100, you might start to not get that much more added benefit. So just something to think about.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It brings us to when you go to the drugstore, what do you buy? Do you buy a physical sunscreen or a chemical sunscreen? I mean, what's even the difference? So physical sunscreens are sunscreens that contain ingredients such as titanium dioxide or zinc oxide. So you've probably seen the movies or maybe even witnessed this in real life where people have a really big white strip of sunscreen across their nose. Well, those are our physical blockers. So it's probably like a zinc oxide or titanium dioxide. So these compounds are stable in the sunlight and they actually reflect or scatter the UV light and normal light. So they're usually pretty thick and can be less spreadable than like a chemical sunscreen, and they can actually rub off quite easily. They are pretty well tolerated all in all. Fun fact, you might actually recognize the compound zinc oxide as one of the main ingredients in baby diaper rash cream. Although they're pretty well tolerated, they can also be a little bit occlusive. So, think back to our diaper rash cream because that is protecting against the moisture, so it's occlusive. But because they can be occlusive, they can actually cause like heat rash. So that could be one thing that might be a side effect of these physical sunscreens. So of note, though, although historically these physical sunblocks have been a little bit less what we'd call cosmetically elegant, now what they've actually done is they've micronized these particles so they can actually be applied smoother and they don't go on as white. So they actually add zinc oxide or titanium dioxide to a lot of cosmetic products now. So the other class of sunscreens is the chemical sunscreens. So these work by actually absorbing the UV light so your skin doesn't absorb the UV light. So depending on the type of ingredient, it will either absorb UVA or UVB. And some will do both, but it's very important to make sure that you have broad spectrum coverage, or that the different chemical components will cover both UVA and UVB to prevent from both burning and skin cancer and photoaging.
And Danielle, aren't you using a physical sunscreen right now for your face? Would you like to share?
Yeah. So yes. So in the last 3 days since we started doing research on this topic again, it just really renewed my interest in wearing sunscreen. I'm not going to lie, I definitely think the photo aging effects spurred it on a little bit for me. But, because we're all a little bit vain. But last summer, I bought some Clinique SPF 50 sunscreen for the face. And it's a mineral sunscreen fluid, they call it, for the face. And it covers both UVA and UVB, and it is a physical sunscreen containing both titanium dioxide and zinc oxide. And this is not a product placement because I could never get a deal with Clinique for beauty, but it goes on pretty well, and it's a smooth sunscreen. What about you, Alex? Do you swear by any sunscreens?
For me, I think I care the most about what I put on my face because my face is like, I guess, more on the oily side. So I like to be a bit more particular with choosing my product. But the one that I'm using, that I've been using for a while now, actually, is a chemical sunscreen. So different than a physical blocker. It's, for those who are interested, it's made by La Roche-Posay. And it's called an anti-shine Anthelios XL sunscreen. So I like it because, it is broad spectrum, it's SPF 60, and it's compatible with my oily skin because you don't get that shine that some sunscreens might give you, because some sunscreens could be quite oily. So I find this one goes nicely on my face. So I've been using it as well. And I've also been more conscientious about using my sunscreen ever since researching this topic as well.
Yeah. I know, right? So, Alex, can you walk us through how are we actually supposed to put sunscreen on?
So that's a really good question. Most people, believe it or not, actually don't apply enough sunscreen. And so I'm going to walk you through why in just a moment. But in terms of when you should be applying your sunscreen, it should actually be applied at least 15 minutes before going outside and repeated at least every 2 hours while you are outside. So for example, if you're planning to head out to the beach, you might want to consider start applying the sunscreen while you're in the car driving to the beach or before you go out.
Unless you're the driver.
Yes, safety first. Yes, so apply for at least 15 minutes before because you want to let that sunscreen have an opportunity to take its effect. And the key is to be generous with your application. You want to apply approximately 7 teaspoons or 35 mils of sunscreen to cover all areas of exposed skin. So if we break it down, that's 1 teaspoon for each arm, 1 teaspoon for each leg, 1 teaspoon for the front, 1 for your back, and 1 for your face and neck. So if you use it properly, you'll end up using quite a large amount. Sometimes people describe it as like a shot glass amount. So we're not condoning or endorsing alcohol, but that is a way where you can have a frame of reference if you want to know the amount that you want to use. A quick common tip is that there are some areas that tend to be forgotten. So please pay attention to areas such as your ears, the back of your hands, your scalp. And if you're like me, if you have really short hair, you want to make sure you try to put sunscreen on areas that are exposed as well of your scalp.
Oh, do you have really short hair?
Well, if you look at my, I don't know what you call it. What's that little like,
Oh, like where the circle?
Yeah, that circle.
Yeah.
So that part has like the most exposure to the sun. And I learned it the hard way because when I distinctly remember going on this like really long hike back when I was like a teenager, and I was good. I put sunscreen on the usual areas, and there were 2 specific areas that I forgot to apply it on, and I suffered the consequences. So one was the bridge of my nose, and the other was that part, the back part of my head, because it was like thinner there, right? It doesn't have as much hair being covered. So I had a sunburn for like a good, it was pretty bad. It lasted for a while.
Oh no.
And I went through the whole process of flaking. So I started having like flakes on my pillowcase for like a whole like week or 2. So yeah, and it was painful too because I was out.
Won't make that mistake again.
I know. Well, now I just wear a hat. So
gotta slap on a hat.
Exactly. I wish somebody had taught me that earlier. So you're an avid like water polo player. So
well, I used to do like summer swimming as a kid and water polo as a kid. Now I don't really get out much into the outdoor pools, but I did a lot back in the day. So yes, sunscreen was a really big part of my routine when I played. So when it comes to swimming, it's really important to kind of apply the same rules as you would for when you're going out. So make sure that you apply the sunscreen about 15 to 30 minutes before you go for a swim. And then it's also important to make sure that you apply it after swimming, and also if you're in the sand or if you're like toweling off, because both of those things can actually, the friction can actually take off your sunscreen. So what's also important is, in addition to those other factors that we told you about, it's important to also make sure that you choose a sunscreen that is going to be either waterproof, if you're actually going in the water, or water resistant if you're, out and you're either,
playing
sweating
sports
heavily, playing sports, playing soccer, or if you are, kayaking or something with it's just very, I don't know,
splashes of water.
unless you're a bad kayaker, and then you should probably just go for the waterproof. But it's interesting because like there's different types of sunscreen for our various types of skin. So as Alex kind of alluded to earlier, he said he has oily skin. So we've got 2 kind of different types of sunscreen products. You've got the ones where you've got like oil particles that are suspended in water, so water-based sunscreen, or you've got the water particles that are kind of suspended in an oil, so the oil-based sunscreen. So the water and oil sunscreens actually tend to have a higher SPF, and they're also tend to be water insoluble, so they're not actually just gonna come off in the water, and those tend to be more waterproof. So typically our waterproof sunscreens are going to be more oily. So, but it is important, if you've got oily skin, try to look for a formulation that says it's non-comedogenic, or you could try to apply a non-oily formulation to areas like your face, provided that it is also, a waterproof formulation. Or you could look for the more expensive product that is non-comedogenic and waterproof to apply to the face. Whereas the other areas that are not acne prone, you can just use a regular oil-based sunscreen. So another thing that people often ask is, what order should you be doing your sunscreen and your makeup? So for chemical sunscreens, it's important to actually do those before you put your makeup on, because you want those to be kind of the first thing that is on your face, and you want to give it some time to just to set. So don't then put on your moisturizers and your makeup right after you put the chemical sunscreen on. So do wait, about 15 minutes or so. That's for the best effects. For your physical sunscreens, however, for those ones, you can put your moisturizer on, wait a bit, and then put your physical sunscreen on. So those are your zinc oxides or your titanium dioxides, and then put your makeup on. You can also actually find some makeup products that contain zinc dioxide or titanium dioxide as well. However, just kind of based on what we know about sunscreen and how you're supposed to apply it liberally, and we know that with makeup we usually try to apply it sparingly, it's probably best to just add a physical or chemical sunscreen into your regimen, because those two things are just not compatible with one another in terms of the amounts we want to put on.
Yeah, that's such a really good point. So the other thing to think about in terms of the sequence of product application is using sunscreen and also bug repellent or bug spray. So if you are going for if you are someone who likes to go camping or outdoor, and those blood-sucking insects love your skin like the mosquitoes, then this part will be important for you. So in general, we recommend applying sunscreen first, then you want to wait a bit, and then you can apply your bug spray. So bug spray is going to be the outermost layer, because you can think of that as being the layer that repels insects. So that's how you can remember that you do sunscreen first, followed by bug spray. In terms of going into sort of the why, there was one study that found that when you do apply sunscreen together with insect repellent, it actually reduces, so the ingredient in the insect repellent actually reduces the sunscreen's effectiveness by up to 33%. So that is why it's important to kind of put in some sort of waiting period between the sunscreen and the bug spray.
Wow, that's a lot. That's huge, 33%. So the next thing that we get questions about is, what can we do for babies? What can they use sunscreen? So it's really actually important that babies under the age of 6 months do not wear sunscreen. And the reason why is they actually have a higher body surface to mass ratio, and their skin can actually absorb more of the sunscreen into the skin's layer, because also they have thinner skin, so they're higher at risk of absorbing sunscreen. So they actually recommend that babies under 6 months do not wear sunscreen. But extreme heat from the sun can be dangerous for all children, especially infants and babies. So Alex, can you walk us through what we can do for babies?
Yeah, absolutely. So for the young parents out there, fear not, there are some things you could implement to help protect your baby. So first thing to just keep in mind is whenever you're out and about, always look for areas where there's shade. So look for like a nice big tree, or even bring your own umbrella to kind of, create that shade. It's really important to consider that. If you were to like put your baby in direct exposure to the sun, normally when as grown adults, if you start to feel like your skin's starting to burn, you would just move away from it, right? And go in and seek shade. But for babies, they aren't able to communicate as effectively, and also they aren't able to remove themselves from direct sunlight. So that's why it's really important to be more intentional in putting them directly underneath a shady area. And it goes without saying that you should never ever leave your child in a parked vehicle, because I don't even need to explain it. We've all seen those really tragic incidences where, unfortunately some kids have died being in a vehicle just because the vehicle is a medium of just keeping in all that heat and sunlight. So like I said, first is seeking shade. Following that, this is another thing that kind of goes along the lines of how babies might not be able to communicate as effectively. So it's really important to make sure that they're well hydrated. So offer your baby or child lots of cool liquids, just so that their body temperature stays cool. And so in terms of what liquids to give, if you are breastfeeding, breast milk is the best. If they are starting to wean off breast milk and they're on to solid foods and other foods, you can also give them just water. Switching gears from protecting babies to now protecting the environment, another question we all thought about is, are there any concerns with using sunscreens with respect to impacting the environment? So Danielle actually took interest in looking into this question, and you came up with some very interesting findings with respect to coral reefs.
Yes. So yeah, the findings that we kind of focused on was about reef-safe sunscreen. So the reason this kind of came up is because some jurisdictions like Hawaii have actually restricted some ingredients in sunscreen known as oxybenzone, also known as BP3. So, fun fact about sunscreen is about 25% of our sunscreen can get washed off within 20 minutes of sun exposure. And as we kind of talked about earlier, this will differ really depending on what type of sunscreen you're wearing, if it is waterproof versus water resistant versus not even supposed to be going in the water. But a certain amount of it will get kind of washed away. So BP3 or oxybenzone is considered a benzophenone, and these have raised some concerns over the years because of the estrogenic and anti-androgenic activity. So it's hormone affecting activities. So there are some statistically significant changes that they've noticed in humans, but the clinical relevance isn't really known. So they found that for babies, for males, it can increase the birth weight. For females, it decreases the birth weight. For males, it increases the gestational age. It just has a few kind of random effects with respect to how it can impact birth weight and also birth age. But these were statistically significant, although not really sure about clinical relevance. So if we also look at oxybenzone, it's an ingredient that's actually in a lot of other products as well. So it's a photostabilizer in things like shampoo, lotions, creams, hairsprays, nail polish, perfume. So there isn't really any consensus on these products and how these products can affect the coral reef. So to kind of single out sunscreen is something that the bodies that like regulate these products are just kind of, questioning a little bit. So back to reefs. There's not really any consensus, but regarding the estrogenic and anti-estrogenic effects of sunblock, but test tube studies have shown that there may be a hazard to coral reefs, as it may damage their DNA and interrupt the hormonal activity of these reefs. And potentially, there has been speculation that it could contribute to reef bleaching, but this is a really hard one to kind of prove because global warming is a huge confounding factor in this. So ultimately, more data is kind of needed to prove any kind of concerns with oxybenzone and the reefs. But if you're somebody that would like to err on the side of caution and be a little bit more cautious when it comes to your reefs, then you can choose sunscreens that have UVA, UVB protection that do not contain this product. But do make sure that you choose a broad spectrum sunscreen that you've reacted well to in the past, and you can err on the side of caution when it comes to the reef safety.
Yeah, your fact about Hawaii banning this ingredient in sunscreen is actually pretty relevant. So I just did a quick Google search, and it says that this rule was actually active the January 1st of this year. So as of this year, Hawaii will ban the sale, offer of sale, or distribution of any sunscreens containing oxybenzone, which is the example that you gave, or another ingredient called octinoxate. Hope I'm saying that right. So unless you have some sort of prescription from your healthcare provider saying that you need to have those ingredients in your sunscreen. But yeah, it's very very timely. It's just this year. I mean, not that any of us are not that any of us here in Canada are planning to travel to Hawaii soon because of obvious reasons, but I think this is a good reminder that we need to do a part in kind of protecting our marine ecosystems and really just take care of our planet. So yeah, might want to consider looking at alternatives next time you are purchasing sunscreen, which also leads me to the other question of enforcement too. So obviously there's going to be, once the pandemic is over and travel opens up again, lots of people are going to be looking to go to Hawaii, myself included. So I wonder what they're going to do in terms of travel recommendations. Are they going to check your sunscreen at the airport? I'm just curious. What do you think? Did you look into that?
No, I don't know how they'd regulate it. I mean, it's a lot of work to go through and look at everybody's sunscreen. But it is interesting, right? I am not sure. I don't know if Australia is doing something similar because they've got lots of coral reefs there and, some of the most amazing marine life in the world with the Great Barrier Reef. But they also have very, very high rates of skin cancer in Australia. So that is a very interesting kind of risk-benefit analysis paradox for that area. So I'm not sure if they have done the same thing or if they will consider doing the same thing, but I think it's definitely interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely lots of things to consider.
So we'll have to see if more information comes out on this one too.
Absolutely. So I hope this topic made everyone a lot more optimistic about the summer, and fingers crossed, hopefully we'll all be able to travel soon and go to Hawaii and other beautiful sunny destinations. So with that being said, we do want to thank everyone for tuning in to this week's episode of Health Animated. If you enjoyed what you heard, it would be really cool if you can just share this with people around you, even give us a comment, or if you have any further questions, definitely, send us a message.
Yeah. While you're sliding on those shades, be sure to slide into our DMs and send us a message on Instagram. Tell us if you've listened to our podcast and if you like it. Or, any feedback that you have, it would be appreciated. And if you'd like to follow us on social media, you can check out our website, healthanimated.com, or find us on various social media platforms by just typing @healthanimated. So thank you guys so much, and bye for now.